This Wonderful Life. Maggie Cahill is
Yeah.
the artistic director. How'd you get this great guy?
Well, you know, I've known Larry for a while because he was in our production of My Fair Lady
saw him. He was
a
great.
few years ago,
Yeah,
and he was
yeah.
Colonel Pickering, and we, you know, we continue to communicate all these years, and he told me he was in A Wonderful Life last year down at Cape May.
Okay.
And I said, oh, I want to hear all about that. So I heard about it. And This Wonderful Life has been done around the United States. But when Larry came in and auditioned for me this fall, I said, he's got to do it at Capitol Rep.
Tag, you're it, right?
Yes, and so we made our own production. It's quite different than the one he was in at Cape May, but he still does one heck of a Jimmy Stewart
Well, I
and
don't know
Lionel
how it could
Barrymore.
be much different because he's got everything in it. You do it all.
He does.
And
Well, there's 36 people in the show. And so that's the entire town of Bedford
They were
Falls and the
invisible.
narrator, too. You're very
it
kind.
was you, Tag.
Yeah. So it's just a compilation of the movie. The movie is almost 3 hours long, and we kind of squeeze it down to 75 minutes. That's the advantage of having the narrator, too, is that he's able to take certain parts of the movie, which take quite a bit of time, and to encapsulate them into a short amount of time, and also to comment on what's going on in the film. So he helps to bring out certain themes and variations on those themes that occur throughout the story that you're probably not aware of when you just watch the movie itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I understand that the movie was not well received.
Well,
That's incredible.
It opened on December 20th, 1946. They purposely
Right
moved
after
it
the
up
war, yeah.
before the end of the year because they wanted it to be eligible for Academy Awards.
Oh.
It was shot that year. They did it April, May, June, through the end of June of 1946. In the middle of a heat wave in Central California. So you see all that
They're
snow.
doing the Christmas
All that snow. In fact, one day it was so hot that Frank Capra let everybody have a day off because people were dying of heat
I
exhaustion.
had what great
Yeah.
trivia that is.
Yeah, in fact, the snow, that was a brand new kind of snow that they had never used before. Up until that time, they always used cornflakes, which they painted white. But the problem is, it looks like snow, but once you walk on it, you can't record any
crunches?
sound. So they came up with a new kind of snow. The tech people came up with a new snow. That was a combination of shaved ice, gypsum, foam, plaster, and water. So it actually looked like real snow. And
Yeah.
they built this town in the middle of the RKO studio in Encino, California. It's 3 blocks long. And those are live oak trees that they brought in, they planted. It was very expensive to build all this. But when it opened, to answer your question, they opened it on December 20th. It was in the middle of a cold snap in New York. So not many people went.
Oh, they didn't
that
know
was
that.
one thing.
Yeah.
And it was very close to the end of the war, so people were looking for something like really bright and shiny. And on the other end of that, they also were up against some other great films of that year of 1946, and so they didn't win any Academy Awards that year.
Yeah,
If they had waited another year, they possibly might have.
Yeah, it's a wonderful,
They
it's
were
a
up
wonderful
against,
life.
They were up
It
against the
is.
best years of our
Oh,
lives.
and that was such
Yeah.
with Frederick March,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That
Right.
was a fabulous
Yeah.
film and very touching.
Yeah.
Although this one's a very touching film, but fun and
Yeah.
I mean it has a lot of humor in it. So now, who wrote the script for this?
Well, that's a very good question because originally it was a short story written by Philip Van Doren Stern, and he tried to get it published in the literary magazines of the day, but nobody was interested. He wrote it in 1939. So by 1943, since nobody was interested, he by himself published it at his own expense, 200 copies, and he put it in Christmas cards and sent it out to his friends. And one of those cards ended up in the hands of somebody who worked at RKO, and they were looking for a Christmas movie for Cary Grant. So they got this story, and they were going to adapt it for Cary Grant. So they bought the rights for $10,000, and they had 3 on-staff writers. One of them is Mark Connolly, who wrote plays with George S. Kaufman. I did one of those plays last year.
Yeah, wonderful.
And one of them was Clifford Odets, who wrote Picnic and Golden Boy. And one of them was Dalton Trumbo, who was later became famous or infamous during the House on Un-American Activities. And in one of those, I think it was the Clifford Odets one, they tried to adapt it. They couldn't figure out how to take the short story, which was called The Greatest Gift, and adapt it. In Clifford Odets' version, there were 2 Georges, and they both had a battle on the bridge, and a good George killed the bad George. They tried for so long that finally...
I'm glad we didn't go there.
That Cary Grant finally moved on and did another film. So by this point, they had this property that they had invested $10,000 into. And Frank Capra had just formed his own studio called Liberty Films, which was brand new. Up until that time, you worked for a large studio, and you were assigned films. And he says, I want to be my own boss, so I'm going to start my own studio called Liberty Films.
That was a whole change at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he bought the rights to that, and then to answer your question, who wrote it? He wrote most of it, but he's also they took the 3 adaptations from those people I've already mentioned, and there were people like Joe Swirling and Albert Hackett and Francis Goodrich, along with Frank Capra. Those are the 4 people that are listed as being the writers. And they took parts and pieces of those other 3 adaptations and put it into theirs. But it was the idea of Mr. Potter was totally Frank Capra's idea. He came up with that. There was no Mr. Potter in the original.
There wasn't in the book. Now, we do know that they did find someone to play George Bailey.
They did.
You mean Jimmy Stewart?
Yeah.
That was always Frank Capra's first choice.
Okay.
They had done a number of films together before that.
And how did
Mr.
you
Smith Goes to Washington and.
How did you nail down his voice?
It's just a matter of listening and having it absorbed and into your brain, and also trying to figure out where to place it. It's a lot of it's just very technical when you try to get it down here into your cricoid part of your voice. So, see, I've got to laugh over there. Yeah. So you have to learn how to do it. This sounds terrible, but it has to be so technical because you're not just doing him. You're doing back and forth from 36 other people that you have to know where it is physically in your voice. So when you go from doing Mary to doing George to doing Mr. Potter, you've got where they're placed in your head voice, in your chest voice, in your throat. Each one is different.
But you even
have to get into
you
it.
even sing like Jimmy Stewart,
At
though.
the end,
You
yeah.
know, well there, but
Yeah,
when
in
you
Buffalo
would
Gals.
in Buffalo Gals,
Yeah.
and then you sing like Mary.
In the middle of it, right?
Somebody asked me if that was really you singing, and I was like, "Yes, we
Yeah.
don't.
It
I'm
was
not
the
in the
voice.
background
Yeah,
singing
it was
that." You know.
pre-recorded because you had to do that because you can't do 2 voices at the same time.
Well, there's one point at the end where we sing in harmony.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. That's
Yeah.
the only
Yeah.
time that you had to
That's
do
the only
that.
time that we have.
But otherwise,
everything else, and even that's me singing. So yeah.
So when
And
you
how did you do Lionel Barrymore? I'm sorry, I'm going to bring you in back.
No, that's
but
fine.
how did you
Please.
do Lionel Barrymore? Because that's an incredible. He is very
Mr.
characteristic.
Bailey, have you put any real pressure on those people of yours to pay their mortgages?
For me, it's a matter of just placing the sound right up here, and I can feel it start to buzz up there when I'm doing it right. So I actually have to warm up my voice quite a bit before we do the show every night.
He does.
and
And every
when-
time he does that, I find myself gritting my teeth.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, because it is that kind of a.
The Baileys
Yeah.
have been a boil on my neck long enough.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing, Larry, honest to God, how you can go from one to the next. Now, you're telling me I have to kind of get into that when I do Jimmy Stewart, and I have to get into that when I do Lionel Barrymore. But on stage, this man does not have to kind of have the
You don't have time. You don't have time.
No.
to decide how he's going to get into this,
Yeah.
take a deep breath or anything.
we don't have time.
You're flying, and not only that, you're moving.
You're moving.
That's it.
I know.
On top of doing the different voices and the different bodies for each one, the most difficult thing I found in doing this show, which is very strange, is that you have to remember where you're looking, the height of the other person that you're speaking to. Because when you're Jimmy Stewart, you're the tallest person in town. So he's always looking down. So if he's looking at Mary, he's looking slightly down. If he's looking at Pete, who's his oldest son, he looks a little bit farther. If he's looking at Jamie, a little farther down. If it's Tommy, it's all the way down here. So, and if you're playing one of those kids, if you're playing Pete, you're looking up to Jimmy Stewart like this. If you're playing Zuzu, you're looking up like this. If you're Tommy, you're like this. So each one has its own head angle, as well as the angle of whether you're looking to the left or right while you're doing the voices.
And while you're moving.
And while you're moving and doing the body at the same time.
Yeah, and putting on a coat and taking a coat
Yeah.
off and moving a
Yeah.
table and
It's
I know.
It's a challenge.
Well, you know, and tell how many times a week do you go to the chiropractor?
Oh,
He does. I'm not kidding.
I
He
do.
really
At
does.
least 3 times a week.
Yeah.
really to
Yeah.
stay.
Part of it is just my neck because I'm doing so much of this. By the end of the show, it's like, oh my God.
You're in pain.
And there's literally no time just to go. I can't even go like that because
Yeah.
you
Well,
don't want
you'll
to
be out of
distract.
character.
Yeah, and you don't want to distract. You
Can't
want to tell
do
the
that.
story and keep it moving forward.
The
Yeah.
set is wonderful. I don't think we have a photo of the set. No, I know we don't. But it makes you feel like it's a marquee when you
Right.
look at it. And it's got a great beginning. And I'm not going to give you any clue about the beginning, but you got to go to the beginning. You
Listen
got
to her. You gotta go. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Don't be sorry. I'm saying, yeah, baby. Good.
It was wonderful. We really enjoyed it, and the audience enjoyed it. And there was a standing ovation. It was such a great play. And I think in part of it, people were like awestruck because they couldn't believe what you were doing on stage.
Well, you have to give a lot of that credit to the woman sitting next to
Oh,
her,
Maggie.
too.
Hey,
Yes.
drum roll.
Thank you. At long last,
No.
I'm glad.
No, it's true because
That's so ridiculous. Hold,
no,
please,
no, it's not,
please.
because when you're in it, you've got so many. It's like being in the middle of a forest. You can't see the forest for the trees. All I see are trees. She's the one that sees the forest. She's the one that sees whole shaping of things. This part needs to be picked up. This part needs to be slowed down. You know, what's the thrust of the story at this point? Because right when I'm in it and I'm trying to figure out whether I'm looking left or right or up or down or what voice I am, I don't have really the time to think about that. She helps
what
me.
the director does.
So if you enjoy the show, look to this woman over here.
But
Okay, Maggie.
It is a tour de force for an actor, and I think people love this story
Yeah.
because, you know, I think George Bailey gets a second chance at life. And I love this story. I love stories like this. I mean, it's one of the reasons I think that I love and will always love A Christmas Carol, because Ebenezer Scrooge doesn't die. He gets to change,
a message.
you know? And same with George Bailey. He gets to see what life was like without him, and then he comes back and he sees life, you know, for all its preciousness. And, you know, I mean, we just saw those incredible people singing on your show, and I think about the message of This Wonderful Life, and I think people, you know, like to see Larry. His performance is undeniably fantastic. It really is.
It is.
And I just think the story is so heartwarming that we all want to be reminded of that. So that's why I think that people like the show.
Frank Capra said this was his favorite film because it showed the importance of one individual life. How one person, even if they think they don't have any impact on society, actually can change the world. And it was all about the importance of the individual. That's why this film, of all the films that he did, and he did a lot of great films, was his favorite film. Yeah.
And the important thing is that Jimmy Stewart in the part, or George Bailey, gets to see what the city or the town would be like if he had never lived. And think about your own life. And sometimes we get discouraged and say, oh my God. But we find out that if we look back at all of the things that we've done in life, how we have changed other people's lives and how other people have changed our lives too. Get a ticket.
Oh, and
December
we
20th.
love you.
December 22nd is the last day you can see it. Get a ticket. You can get them through Proctor's and at proctors.org. What am I thinking? And get your tickets. You can come on down and pick them up and pick up your Les Mis tickets at the same time.
Gosh darn it, now come on down and come see This Wonderful Life. It's a great show, you'll love it. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jimmy.